Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Eleanor Hart had always believed love was built in quiet moments, not grand promises. For 5 steady years, her life with Daniel Whitmore had followed that belief. They planned modest futures over shared dinners, laughed through financial uncertainty, and held each other through disappointments that never made it into polite conversation. When Daniel slipped a promise ring onto her finger, it felt less like a proposal and more like a vow of patience. Eleanor was precise by nature, careful with words and commitments, and Daniel had once admired that about her. She trusted slowly, but once she did, she trusted completely. When Daniel's political career began to rise, subtle changes crept in. Phone calls shortened. Plans were postponed. His eyes wandered during conversations, as if always scanning a room Eleanor couldn't see. She told herself it was stress, ambition, the weight of public life. She stayed loyal, adjusting herself around his absences, convincing herself love meant endurance. What finally broke them wasn't a dramatic fight, but a calm, devastating conversation where Daniel spoke of needing space and finding himself. Eleanor nodded, composed even as her inner world fractured quietly. Charlotte Reeves became Eleanor's lifeline in the aftermath. They had been best friends since university, bonded by late-night confessions and mutual dreams of meaningful lives. Charlotte arrived with wine, tissues, and an unwavering certainty that Eleanor deserved better. She listened attentively, always ready with affirmations that soothed Eleanor's wounded pride. When Eleanor doubted herself, Charlotte reminded her worth. When Eleanor cried, Charlotte stayed. It never occurred to Eleanor that comfort could coexist with calculation. The months after the breakup were slow and heavy. Eleanor focused on routine, work, walks, early nights, to rebuild stability. Charlotte stayed close, offering gentle encouragement to move on, while subtly discouraging any lingering attachment to Daniel. Some people are meant to leave, she would say softly. Eleanor believed her. Trust felt easier than suspicion, especially when grief already occupied so much emotional space. She had no reason to think that the person helping her heal was quietly shaping a different narrative behind her back. 2 years passed, and Eleanor had grown steadier, if not fully healed. That was when Charlotte announced her engagement. She did with theatrical excitement, refusing to reveal her fiancé's identity, calling it a surprise everyone would love. Eleanor smiled and hugged her, genuinely happy, even as something uneasy flickered in her chest. Charlotte asked her to be a bridesmaid, insisting it wouldn't feel right without her. Eleanor agreed, determined not to let old wounds define her present. As preparations began, Eleanor threw herself into helping. She organized details for the bridal shower, coordinated guest lists, and smoothed over logistics Charlotte seemed too distracted to manage. It was during one such task that Eleanor noticed a familiar surname on the guest list, Whitmore, Daniel's cousin. The name lingered in her mind longer than it should have. When she asked Charlotte casually about it, Charlotte laughed it off, calling it a coincidence. Eleanor forced herself to accept the answer. The bridal shower arrived wrapped in pastel decorations, laughter, and curated joy. Friends toasted Charlotte's happiness, praising the mystery groom and the romance of surprises. Eleanor smiled, clapped, and played her role perfectly. Still, she noticed how Charlotte deflected certain questions, how her smile tightened whenever Daniel's name surfaced in unrelated conversation. Eleanor told herself she was overthinking, a habit she developed after heartbreak. She didn't want to be the woman who saw threats everywhere. By the time the after-party wound down, Eleanor was exhausted. The emotional labor of smiling had caught up with her. She slipped away to a quiet guest room, lying down fully clothed, intending only to rest for a moment. Voices drifted in from the hallway, Charlotte's among them, louder now, loosened by wine. Eleanor closed her eyes, staying still, letting the sounds pass over her. Then she heard her own name. Charlotte's tone shifted, sharpened by confidence. She laughed as she spoke about patience, about waiting for the right moment to step in. Eleanor's heart began to race as realization crept in. The room seemed to shrink as Charlotte bragged about timing, about understanding Daniel better than Eleanor ever had. She spoke of emotional closeness that had existed long before the breakup, of secrets shared while Eleanor trusted both of them blindly. Eleanor lay frozen as Charlotte mocked her loyalty, calling it sentimental weakness. She described carefully rewriting timelines, ensuring no overlap could tarnish Daniel's public image. The groom, Charlotte confirmed with pride, was Daniel Whitmore. Eleanor's breath came shallow, but her body remained still. Rage tried to rise, but something colder took its place. Clarity. The betrayal wasn't sudden, it was strategic. And Eleanor understood in that moment that reacting impulsively would give Charlotte the satisfaction she craved. When the voices faded, Eleanor remained where she was, staring at the ceiling in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. Instead, she began to think. She replayed moments she had dismissed, visits she'd excused, conversations that now carried new meaning. Grief transformed into resolve. If Charlotte had spent years crafting a lie, Eleanor would spend however long it took uncovering the truth. She rose from the bed quietly, her expression calm, already planning her next steps. Eleanor did not confront Charlotte after the bridal shower. She returned home with a composed smile, her silence mistaken for ignorance. Inside, however, something fundamental had shifted. Sleep evaded her as she replayed every overheard word, not with hysteria but with precision. By morning, grief had reorganized itself into intent. She opened old journals she kept during her relationship with Daniel, noting dates, emotions, and moments she once believed insignificant. Patterns emerged with disturbing clarity. Illnesses when Charlotte had checked in on Daniel. Work trips when he'd grown suddenly unreachable. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It had a structure. At work, Eleanor confided in Vanessa Cole, a colleague known for her sharp memory and quiet loyalty. Vanessa listened without interruption, then asked practical questions. Dates, locations, screenshots. Together, they began assembling a timeline. Vanessa cross-referenced public appearances, archived social media posts, and event photos. What they found erased any lingering doubt. Charlotte and Daniel had been seen together months before the official breakup, always at the edges of frames, never tagged, never obvious. The deception wasn't careless. It was curated. Eleanor's investigation deepened without obsession. She moved carefully, maintaining normalcy in public while gathering proof privately. Old emails surfaced, their phrasing suddenly revealing. Charlotte's supportive messages during Eleanor's illness coincided with Daniel's absences. Eleanor noted how Charlotte had subtly encouraged distance, framing Daniel's withdrawal as personal growth rather than neglect. Each discovery hurt, but none surprised her anymore. Pain became data. Betrayal became evidence. Rather than expose them immediately, Eleanor considered impact. She understood Daniel's political aspirations depended on perception, on a narrative of integrity and stability. Charlotte had protected that image meticulously. Eleanor decided the truth deserved the same level of strategy. She contacted Oliver Grant, a journalist known for factual restraint. She didn't beg or dramatize. She presented a clean timeline and let the facts speak. Oliver agreed to verify independently and prepare release. As the wedding day approached, Charlotte grew increasingly radiant, mistaking Eleanor's calm for acceptance. Eleanor attended fittings, rehearsals, and dinners with grace. She smiled at Daniel without bitterness, watching his discomfort flicker when their eyes met. He avoided prolonged conversation, unaware she now understood everything he tried to hide. Eleanor felt no urge to confront him privately. Silence was more powerful. The church filled with guests dressed for celebration. Flowers framed the aisle, and a projector cycled through curated memories of Charlotte and Daniel's journey. Eleanor took her seat heart steady. When the priest asked if anyone objected, phones across the room began to vibrate. Notifications lit up. A headline appeared on the projector, replacing smiling photos with documented truth, dates, images, and a calm expose. Gasps rippled through the pews. Charlotte turned pale. Daniel froze. Eleanor stood and walked forward, her steps unhurried. She handed Charlotte an envelope containing the annotated evidence. Her voice was soft, controlled. She told Charlotte she hadn't lost Daniel that day. She had lost Eleanor the night she laughed about betrayal. Turning to Daniel, Eleanor thanked him for making it easy to walk away. Eleanor exited the church without waiting for chaos to settle. Outside, the air felt lighter. She didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, public narratives unraveled. Daniel's campaign faltered under scrutiny. Charlotte retreated from public view. Eleanor declined interviews, choosing privacy over spectacle. She returned to work, traveled briefly, and allowed herself rest. Healing came not from revenge, but from clarity. Eleanor rebuilt her life with intention, redefining loyalty and trust on her own terms. She learned that dignity wasn't silence. It was truth delivered without cruelty. When she finally removed the promise ring, it felt like closure, not loss. Eleanor moved forward unburdened, no longer defined by deception, but by the strength it took to rise above it. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.